Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we are talking about your Minnesota Vikings taking on the San Francisco 49ers. That matchup squares off at 3:30 on Saturday. Big divisional round matchup. Vikings will be playing on the road at Levi Stadium. So today we'll do our usual Thursday show, breaking down position by position, position group by position group, and try to find some weaknesses as well as strengths for this 49ers team and compare that to your Minnesota Vikings. So that'll be the meat of the show, and then as usual we'll finish up with our game predictions for the week and a little bit of fun analysis on those games as well. So that is the game plan for today's show. Let's jump right into it here. So the 49ers coming in here, they are the number one overall seed in the NFC. You could make an argument that they are also the most complete and strongest team in the NFL across the board. They put together one of the strongest defenses in the entire NFL this season. That's I feel like Nick Bosa has gotten a lot of the publicity for that, coming in there as one of the top rookies in the NFL. But as a whole, you look at this defense and it's filled with superstars or potential superstars, I suppose, and guys that have done it before at a high level like Richard Sherman. You've also got the offense that's led by Jimmy Garoppolo and plenty of playmakers across this board. None of them are huge names by any means. Some of them are younger players. Honestly, other than Garoppolo, it's George Kittle and Emmanuel Sanders, and then just a bunch of guys that can do a lot of different things for this offense. And Kyle Shanahan, being the offensive wizard that he is, has been able to get the most out of a roster that offensively, like I said, other than those couple of names, really doesn't have, household names, I suppose, is probably the fairest way to put it. I'm not saying these are bad players by any means, but these are not guys. Deebo Samuel is a talented rookie, but then you've got Kendrick Bourne, who has contributed in a big way. You've got Raheem Mostert, who bounced around the league all over the place before becoming their starting running back. Tevin Coleman, who was a backup to Devonta Freeman in Atlanta. Matt Breida, who was supposed to be the backup to Jerick McKinnon when he signed here. Just a lot of different names that are all contributing in a variety of different ways. So that's kind of a broad outlook of this roster. Let's take a look in depth, starting with that quarterback position. And I'm going to let you tell me about Jimmy Garoppolo because I know you're a big fan of his.
Yeah, huge fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. Definitely bought into him a long time ago. He's like, I don't know, he's fine. I mean, he has not garnered he's garnered the attention and the hype of someone who looked promising as a Tom Brady successor at one point. I don't think he's quite lived up to that, and the fact that, he's winning games. Like, he's going to be, like, if you're a QB wins person, then you think Jimmy is elite, because he does win a lot. But I think, he's put in a great situation with a great, innovative offensive mind, and he has a couple of – their offensive line is pretty solid for one, but also I think George Kittle is the best tight end receiving-wise in the NFL. You can argue Travis Kelce maybe. You can argue Zach Ertz. But I think Kittle is probably the best guy there. And so you got that safety blanket, and then between Deebo Samuel, between Emmanuel Sanders, those two guys are studs as well. So he's okay. He's okay. He's fine. I think he's not gonna. It's similar to the way we talk about Kirk, but I think Jimmy G is a little bit of a tier lower than Kirk per se, where Jimmy G is not going to carry the Niners to a win. And so, like, if I'm defending, let's say I have to pick my poison, so to speak, to defend the 49ers, I'm going to make Jimmy G drop back and sling it down the field to somebody not named George Kittle. And then if that's the case, and the Vikings can stop that, I guess, three-headed monster running attack between Breida and Coleman and Mostert, whoever it is that gets the ball, they do run the ball really well. But if they can stop that, kind of force Jimmy G to throw it down the field and convert those 3rd and 7s, those 3rd and 9s, I think the Vikings will be in good shape defensively.
Yeah, so Garoppolo obviously comes over here from New England a couple of years back. He's now in his third season with San Francisco. Speaking of the winning that you mentioned during your little analysis there, he's 19-5 as a starting quarterback since joining the San Francisco 49ers. So that supports your reasoning that
he is 0-1 against the Minnesota Vikings during that.
He is that. Yeah, he lost to the Vikings last season. I believe that was opening week too, wasn't it?
It was. Yep.
So Garoppolo did put up some solid numbers this season. 69% completion, nearly 4,000 passing yards, 27 touchdowns to 13 picks. He had a couple games down the stretch which really showed promise. So if you're a 49ers fan, there are some things that he was able to do in late game situations. He did finish the year with 4 fourth quarter comebacks. And he put this team in a position to win from an offensive perspective a couple of times throughout the year. The problem with him is the inconsistency, and I think that that's kind of the fun relationship that he has with Kirk Cousins, because Vikings fans kind of treat, like you said, Vikings fans kind of treat Kirk Cousins that way, where when he's on, he's really on, and you're thrilled that he's your quarterback. But when he's off, it's all about the defense and how many points are they going to allow, because you might not get much out of Garoppolo. That's simply what it's been like for his career. Just a little bit on and off, bit of a roller coaster this season, yet they still won 13 games. And that's largely because, like you said, they can run the ball extremely effectively. I believe they are the highest efficiency rushing attack in the NFL this season. That's a combination of a couple of different things. You start with Kyle Shanahan being one of the best play callers and schemers in the NFL right now. There are really only a couple of guys who are even on his level, in my opinion. You think of Sean McVay and you think of Sean Payton, and those are really the only two guys to me that are even close to him in terms of innovation and being just creative with play calling. So you start there with that rushing attack, and the way that he is able to get the most out of these guys starts with his scheming ability, the right play calls at the right time, that type of thing. Those are sort of intangibles that really you can't teach, just a feel for the game and just an ability to be creative with your personnel. That's something that Kyle Shanahan does as good or better than anyone in the NFL. You can't stop that part of it. The other thing that he does is he keeps everyone fresh. You talk about that three-headed monster. It has been led by Mostert over the last several weeks. I believe Shanahan has called him the starter in a couple of different interviews. So if you are looking for a starter in this game, Mostert is your guy at the running back position. But Tevin Coleman gets mixed in, and Matt Breida is a home run threat as well. We've seen him take it the distance from a long ways out on multiple occasions. And that honestly doesn't even round out the running back group if you want to consider Kyle Juszczyk as well, the fullback that is used. There is no other team in the NFL that uses a fullback like Shanahan does. And the way that Juszczyk is used is it's unconventional to the position. It's borderline radical in terms of the strategy. I mean, he's running wide receiver routes. There is no one else in the NFL that plays the position of fullback quite like Juszczyk. And so you've got these four guys here who are trading snaps, who are trading, being the center of attention on certain plays, and none of them seem to have an issue with it. There's no ego amongst this group, and they wear you down with the fact that they are always fresh, and this is a talented group. I mean, these aren't superstars by any means, or at least as prospects. None of them were thought to be, with the exception of maybe Coleman, thought to be bell cow running backs in the NFL, but when you're giving them only 10 to 15 touches apiece and you're keeping them fresh and have a nice rotation going, and then you're setting them up well situationally with your play calling and your personnel, I mean, this group has put together just an extremely impressive attack that is rivaled only by the Ravens, with Lamar Jackson running the show in Baltimore.
Right. It's like you can tell watching this team that it's not necessarily Jimmy G's talent that is getting the job done.
Right.
It's like you said, it's the way that the positions that he's put in. And I just think is a huge credit to Kyle Shanahan. And clearly he has emerged as, again, like you said, one of the top 2-3 offensive minds in football. And you mentioned Kyle Juszczyk and the way that the Niners use him. He has 33 receptions of 15 or more yards since 2015, which is obviously more than any other fullback in football, because no other fullback has more than 7.
Yeah.
So I mean, the fullback is becoming a lost art, but the fact that Juszczyk is athletic enough to do that, versatile enough where he can be a lead blocker, but also he can beat a lot of linebackers, single coverage, right? Or he can beat potentially safety single coverage, which is unique out of that position. So
he's kind of their Taysom Hill. He's not a quarterback, so he doesn't get the recognition.
To pass, right? But he'll line up wide.
He's a Swiss Army knife in that way, I suppose.
He'll put in the slot. He'll play out of the backfield, obviously. So that's another guy to watch for. But one thing I do want to mention is that for as good as George Kittle is, for as dangerous as he is, and for we talked a lot earlier in the season about the Vikings and defending tight ends, and it doesn't seem like they do that very well. Actually, they were flat out dominant against tight ends this season. Pass rating allowed of 60, which is best in the league, and second best is actually San Francisco at 88. So the Vikings were 28 points in passer rating, better than the second best team defending tight ends, which bodes really well for a team that absolutely loves to target the tight end position in George Kittle. I think if you think back in the Niners season, there was one of their last couple of games, I'll have to look it up, but they had their receiving number, I think it was the Ravens game, their receiving numbers were hilarious because George Kittle had 70% of the targets, something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to try and find it here. But basically, that's where the first read is quite a bit. And fair enough, because Kittle's really talented. But if you can get Jimmy G off that first read and maybe take away the tight end, I think that's where he can be kind of shaky after that.
So Kittle, you mentioned earlier, called Kittle a safety net, and I agree, he is a safety net. But he, in addition to that point, he's also the guy that they try to get the ball in his hands with the game on the line. We saw this most recently against, I believe it was Seattle, when he had that big breakout run to put San Francisco in striking distance and ultimately win the game. Kittle is, so he's good enough, he's used in a couple of different ways. He's used as that guy that can leak out of the backfield, and he can be your biggest strength offensively, but he can also be that guy that just helps Jimmy Garoppolo in terms of, giving him a quality option amidst some uncertainty within this receiving group. So you've got Kittle, who could be dominant, and like you said, will take the lion's share of the targets, and then you've got this group of wide receivers who complement him extremely well because a lot of them are essentially gadget wide receivers. You look at the way that Deebo Samuel is used. He is used as a player that can catch screen passes and be used in that sort of way. You can compare it to the way that, for example, the Vikings used to use Cordero Patterson in terms of just trying to get him the ball in space and then seeing what he can do with it. He's not your standard, I'm going to run a full route tree wide receiver. Samuel's the guy that you want to get the ball in his hands and make his yardage after the catch. So he can be dangerous in terms of when you see a trips look and you get these two solid blocking receivers out in front of him and just give him some space. He can be dangerous that way. He's going to take handoffs from unconventional spots on the field, whether that's a jet sweep or lining up straight up in the backfield as a running back. He's used in a lot of different ways, and that complements Kittle's skill set because not only is Kittle a major threat as a receiver, but he's also an outstanding blocker as well.
He is.
And he springs guys loose with regularity. So even when Kittle doesn't have the ball in his hand, you can make an argument that he is the most lethal piece of this offense because he contributes as a blocker as well, and he contributes in a huge way. And that is on top of having 5 guys up front who are now, I believe, playing as a complete unit. They didn't play as a group because of injuries early on in the year, and I believe all of them are back together now. You look at Joe Staley on the left side, Mike McGlinchey out of Notre Dame on the right side. You get 2 outstanding tackles, and then you've got the interior that is probably a bit of a work in progress, but still very solid. And the way that the scheme is used by Kyle Shanahan doesn't put them in a position to be, unsuccessful because the ball is coming out of Garoppolo's hands so quickly most of the time. So just the way that it's just a well-functioning machine as a whole. Really the only superstar here is Kittle, in my opinion. But everything works around him. I mean, you can make an argument, I guess, for Emmanuel Sanders. He's had his moments, and he is, a solid route runner and one of the best possession receivers in the NFL. But he's not a superstar like Kittle is. Most of these guys just contribute all in different ways. And if you just bring up the 49ers roster, if you just put it up in front of you, the only 2 guys that might not see snaps throughout a game are the 2 backup quarterbacks and the backup offensive linemen. Everyone else may be used throughout the throughout the game. I've seen Jeff Wilson out there too, and he had one of the biggest catches and runs of the season, and he is listed as their number 4 running back. So Kyle Shanahan takes no prisoners. He doesn't care who you are. He puts out the best lineup, the freshest lineup on every single play, and he schemes it to put any defense for that matter, but in this case, the Vikings defense at a disadvantage.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to kind of piggyback off of from you was that you mentioned that the Niners have 2 great tackles, right? Joe Staley, Mike McGlinchey, and there's an optimistic side to facing this this offense that is well schemed, well coached, always going to be put in great positions, maximizing the talent. Is that the Vikings did just they just played a team with 2 all-pro caliber tackles, and Zimmer kind of schemed around it to put Hunter and Griffin inside a couple times and attack the weaker interior. And you wonder if that might be something that they continue with this week in the passing situations, when they can also bring in like Weatherly and Odenigbo on the outside, where they can go at the tackles and then maybe clog the middle with Griffin and Hunter. Who knows? They might not. They might. You wonder if they maybe use it less or maybe not at all after putting it on film against the Saints. But I do think that the Vikings have something there to think about, at least, or for an option there that they can maybe neutralize, I guess, the effectiveness of those tackles, because clearly that worked. And for what it's worth, the Vikings, when Hunter and Griffin did go up against Armstead and Ramczyk last week, they were successful too, when they would just straight up went up against them. But they were also able to kind of take advantage of the weak spot of that Saints offensive line too. So you wonder, maybe they can do that this week. But I do think that Jimmy G is vulnerable, A, when he gets pressure on, but B, also when you take away that first read, because he looks very comfortable and he's very effective and efficient and accurate when he can get to that first read and just 1, 2, 3 step and bang, get the ball out to Kittle or Sanders or whoever it is. But I think after that, he can be ineffective.
Yeah, you look at just strictly from a personnel standpoint, the Vikings defense seems to match up pretty well with this offense. You look at the strengths of the San Francisco offense. I think the biggest strengths are the tight end position, the 2 tackles, and then again, this is from strictly a personnel standpoint. It's the two tackles, the tight end, and really that's about it. I mean, the rest of this is a matter of being schemed up well. I guess you could make an argument for Sanders as well. So those are your 4 core pieces here, and the Vikings respond with basically their strongest unit. One of the best defensive line rotations in the NFL. We'll get to the best defensive line rotation in a couple minutes here. But with Hunter and Griffin, you answer these 2 tackles, whether they're lined up conventionally or Zimmer tries to go with something a little bit more creative like he did last week against New Orleans. The Vikings are able to answer this offensive line with 2 guys that can get pressure at a very consistent and significant rate. So that's helpful. And then you look at the wide receiver crew. I mentioned that Deebo Samuel is he's this very dangerous home run threat, but he's not a conventional wide receiver. That's something that the Vikings seem to be able to answer well with their own scheme. Mike Zimmer has been as good as anyone at taking gadget players, for the most part, out of the game by just taking them out. Whether that's having a linebacker or a safety over the top that's sort of spying these guys. I mean, Taysom Hill last week was really the last time that I remember Zimmer truly getting tricked by a guy that isn't fundamentally skilled. So the Vikings defense matches up well with this group, and that kind of starts with the fact that Garoppolo's not the most consistent, or certainly not an elite quarterback. It's just a matter of, can Mike Zimmer answer whatever Kyle Shanahan is calling? I think the first, the scripted plays in this game will tell us a lot about how Mike Zimmer is going to respond. And if he's able to stop the script in the start, then it just becomes a battle of wits. And there are very few coaches in the NFL where I'm not confident Mike Zimmer can scheme them up and ultimately find a way to take chunks out of their offense. But Kyle Shanahan is a rare breed where he's coming from a background of so many elite head coaches. He's got, of course, his father being one of the best minds that's ever been involved in the NFL, period. And he's taken West Coast customs. I mean, he's put his own spin on things. He's just so dangerous in so many different ways that it doesn't really, the personnel matter not nearly as much as you would in a normal game, I suppose. It's a matter of like the Vikings defense and the 49ers offense can match one-on-one heads up in games, but how are they going to be utilized? Which coach is going to get the better of the other? And that's just not a question that I can answer because Kyle Shanahan is so creative that really, if you put on the film of something that he put up in Week 14, he may not even be using that stuff anymore.
Right.
And
yeah, it's like when Sean Payton kind of first came in the league and nobody knew what his what his specialties were, what he the different things he's going to throw at you. It's like the best coaches can not kind of get figured out, so to speak, for like decades, right? And that's kind of with Sean Payton. That's the respect he's earned.
Right.
Andy Reid, those are the guys that they're effective after a really long time.
They're just constantly adapting.
But at the same time, some of these offensive wizards come in and they're new and they're different. That they come from a coaching tree for one, but that like Andy Reid or Shanahan, but then they put their own twist on it. To match modern NFL or match their own preferences, whatever. And I think that's what Shanahan's done now. That's what like Sean McVay did in 2017, 2018. And when you get that, and teams haven't quite figured out Kyle Shanahan yet, to me at least it doesn't seem like it. I mean, obviously in Atlanta, he had one thing, but then he kind of had to match it to his personnel a little bit, I think, in San Francisco. So he's brought, at least to me, it looks like he's brought in some different running concepts specifically kind of to like we've talked about, involve all three running backs and maybe four, which is completely different than you see a lot of times in the past. So it's going to be a challenge, but it's a different challenge than New Orleans, where it's like, okay, Michael Thomas is probably the guy to stop, and if you stop him, you have a good chance. Here, it's kind of I think really outside of Kittle, like there's a bunch of guys that are way more capable than maybe the other Saints weapons. They're like Sanders, Samuel, any of the running backs out of the backfield, including Juszczyk. They're all very capable versus like a Ted Ginn or like a Traquan Smith, that type of thing.
Absolutely. So as a whole, when you look at this offense, the obvious statement that we're going to make every single week and that you hear from every talking head across the globe is you got to stop the quarterback first and foremost. And while Garoppolo is not necessarily the most threatening guy in the world, slowing him down isn't just a matter of stopping his talent. It's a matter of stopping the scheme that's in front of him too, and being able to slow down. Like, for example, if Garoppolo's going to do 3-step drops and the Vikings aren't able to get any pressure, then it comes down to the Vikings secondary, and that's that's a huge risk for the Vikings based off the way they have covered short routes this season, and based off the way that these guys, when they get the ball in their hands, they're as dangerous as anyone in the league.
Yeah.
So, the personnel,
George, by the way, George Kittle is number 2 in YAC since the beginning of 2018.
That doesn't shock me.
Among all receivers, all running backs, all tight ends.
Yeah.
It's 4 running backs and then like 4 running backs in the top 5 and George Kittle.
Yeah.
Like he's like special with the ball, which is unique for a tight end.
And again, for as special as he is with the ball, he can be just as dangerous without it as well. So,
yeah.
Ultimately, keep an eye on Kittle. He's going to be getting the targets. The ball's going to be in his hand a lot. And even when the ball's not in his hand, just watch to see where he lines up, because there's a good chance the football is going in that direction because of how great he can be as a second level or third level blocker. He's the type of guy that's going to spring the running back free and get them into a one-on-one situation. And then you trust guys like Breida and Mostert specifically with their breakaway speed, whereas Coleman tends to be a guy that is used more effectively inside the 10, 15-yard range. So that's basically what the Vikings are dealing with. And then, again, Kyle Juszczyk, 44. Watch that number. Watch where he lines up. He will be used creatively. He will be used as kind of a trick play candidate, I suppose. And he will be used conventionally as a fullback too, and he can do that as well as anyone in the league. So I would say those are the guys that you want to keep an eye on. Sanders is going to be your first down guy. If the 49ers are staring down a third and long situation, you can probably bet that Sanders is going to be the guy they're going to get the look to if the Vikings are able to cover up George Kittle. So that's essentially what you're looking at with this offense. And really, for as much as we just talked about this group, they honestly aren't even the biggest weapon on this team. It's offensive head coach, but this is a team that has won with defense throughout the year, and they boast one of the strongest overall defensive rosters that you're going to come across in the NFL.
Right, and they're getting back a couple of guys from injury and from absence that are huge for this team. Obviously, Nick Bosa is kind of the headline, obviously, and then you get Richard Sherman in the secondary as well. But D Ford, another pass rusher who I just saw this stat. I need to read it off because it kind of shows you the impact that another guy besides Bosa or Sherman might have. So D Ford is back with the 49ers this week. With Ford, the 49ers defense percentage of blocks defeated. So whether it's a run or the pass, just the blocks that they're winning or defeating, 63%, number 2 in the league. Without Ford, that percentage falls to 47%, which is 16th, completely average in the league. So they go immediately from average to top flight in the NFL in terms of just beating blocks. And for a Vikings offensive line that was really good against the Saints, but overall throughout the season, not so great. We don't look at the Vikings as a top 10, maybe even top 15 offensive line. That's to me, that's a significant number there for D4, and he's going to have a big impact in this game.
Absolutely. You look at this three-person rotation essentially, and I'm sure that San Francisco would love it to be 4, but it just really hasn't panned out for Solomon Thomas since he was drafted, and that's unfortunate because he was one of my favorite prospects coming out for what it's worth. But the 3 guys that you're going to want to keep an eye on coming off the edge here are Bosa, of course, who you probably haven't stopped hearing about since you've been listening to Vikings 49ers coverage this week. But you've got Eric Armstead as well, and then D Ford, who you just mentioned, who came over from Kansas City this offseason. Those 3 guys are going to be rotating. They're going to be moving all over the place. Bosa will line up on the left and right side. Ford will also line up on the left and right side. Those 2 guys tend to win with finesse more than anything else. Don't get me wrong, they can win with power too. But generally speaking, you're going to see Bosa and Ford use their hands to get free from blockers, whereas Armstead tends to be a guy who is more powerful. He can kind of get offensive linemen off their anchor, and he's dangerous in that way. But Ford and Bosa are the 2 guys that really come up with those highlight reel type sacks where they're just blowing through a guy, busting open coverage, and just embarrassing guys. That's their style of play. And then you've also got DeForest Buckner that's going to line up in the interior, and he's as dangerous as anyone too. There's so much talent within this group, and we can go on and on with with other players that can contribute on this line as well. The fact that they are able to withstand the fact that Solomon Thomas has basically been a bust to this point, and still have one of the best defensive line rotations that I can think of in recent memory. I mean, how often do you get 3 defensive ends who are Pro Bowl caliber, all pro caliber players? It's just, it's very rare that you have this much talent and that you can, the Vikings love to do this with, it obviously started with Danielle Hunter, Brian Robinson, and Everson Griffin. They have since had to work in guys like Stephen Weatherly and Ifeadi Odenigbo, and we have all seen how effective this pass rush can be when you're able to keep guys fresh. Now just amp that up, give that, like a Mario mushroom, amp that up one level, and that's basically what you got with San Francisco's defensive line, because their rotation is filled with talent, and it goes even deeper than the Vikings does.
Right, yeah. I mean, you're right about that. And it's like, I know we were talking a little bit with kind of the climbing the pocket group of, the network, and we're talking about the Niners defense and, how a lot of it is similar to the Legion of Boom Seattle era defense where, a lot of it's like cover 3 or like the single high safety. And, Sherman still does this thing where he's kind of on one side of the field, but he absolutely locks up that side of the field, and you kind of have to look elsewhere most of the time. But like, when they blitz stuff, it's not like super exotic or like weird or different. It's just like they bring an extra guy, or they just straight up rush 4, one of the 2, and they usually get there with one, whether it's a different stunt, whether it's we've talked about how Bosa and Armstead and Ford will move all around, and they create mismatches that way. But like when they blitz, it's not super crazy, or they don't like disguise it a ton. They send the right guys. Or they don't send anybody, and they trust their D-backs, they trust their linebackers to cover up and keep things in front of them. And obviously that secondary it's deep, but it's also their starters are also very talented as well.
Yeah, you look at this defense and really what makes them one of the most dangerous defenses in football and really within recent memory is the fact that they can rush for and get away with that. Like you said, the fact that they don't need to blitz to get to the quarterback because they have so much talent coming off the edge and from the interior as well. I don't mean to pass over Sheldon Day at all. He's been a strong contributor for this team. He's just unfortunately he's just not as big of a piece as Bosa, Buckner, Armstead, and Ford have been for this unit. And the fact that they can rush for and get good coverage on the back end just allows them that much more time to get to the quarterback. I highly doubt that the Vikings will be doing anything deeper than a 5-step drop in this game because you simply have to get the ball out of your hand quickly. You have to finesse this a little bit too. There will be some play action, and honestly, there will be some play action that don't work and look really ugly. I assume that'll happen as well because Robert Saleh does call a great game on top of the fact that he has the personnel to do it. So you look at this defensive line, but they complement the secondary very well, and they're able to sort of, because of how strong that pass rush is, they're able to make guys like Ahkello Witherspoon look a little bit better than he actually is. He's a solid player. He's a starting quality cornerback in the NFL, but he's by no means elite. And because they are able to get to the quarterback at a high rate and very consistently getting there within 3 seconds or less, it's making guys like Witherspoon, for example, that much more dangerous. And you can only imagine what type of an impact that has on a guy like Sherman, who loves to jump routes, loves to gamble, and really loves to play with the mind of the opposing wide receiver by just running their routes for him, essentially. He's one of the best in the business, one of the smartest players to ever play this game, period, in terms of football IQ and, conventional IQ as well, even though he has a Stanford education. But my point being here is that the way that this defensive line is able to complement this secondary gives guys like Jimmy Ward the ability to just kind of be a true free safety and sit back there and single high and kind of just have some fun out there, use his instincts, use his knowledge of the tape that he watched all season long, and just basically just wreak havoc. And then you complement him with a guy like Jaquiski Tart, who doesn't get much name recognition, partially because I don't think many people know how to pronounce his name correctly, but also because he's kind of a piece of this defense that has made a name for it as a complete unit, with Richard Sherman and Nick Bosa sort of being the face. You cover up guys who are having excellent seasons in Tart, Ward, and then also this group of linebackers who is simply outstanding.
Yeah, well, and I mean, with Tart, I think, did he miss any time this year with injury? I don't believe he. If he did, it wasn't very much. But the point, I mean, he allowed less than 100 yards all season in coverage on 13 catches, and then just the one touchdown. So he's a stud out there. And then another guy I wanted to point out was who they use in the slot quite a bit. That's K'Waun Williams, PFF second highest graded slot corner. And in terms of depth of target, it was 3.8 yards on average. So, they're not challenging Williams at all in that slot. Like, he's keeping guys in front of him, and he's extremely good in the press as well. So if it's Thielen or Diggs in the slot, they're going to have a challenge, or maybe BC, whoever it is. I don't know who. Things get mixed up. We saw Adam Thielen at fullback against the Saints, so who knows where guys are going to be lined up with Stefanski. But point being is that out of the slot, Vikings haven't been throwing a lot out to the slot very much this season. A lot of it's just because they like to use both Rudolph and Irv Smith and have only two receivers. But point being, the slot's going to be locked down pretty well by Williams in that defense. So that's another guy to look at. Just another piece again on this defense that from Robert Saleh that has been why this defense has been so dominant.
Absolutely. So the last unit that we haven't really touched on here is one of the most overlooked units probably in the NFL, and that's partially because Quan Alexander, who has been cleared to play and is now, per report, a coach's decision whether or not he will return this week. So if he doesn't return, this unit is two rookies in Dre Greenlaw, and I want to say it's Azeez Al-Shahir. If I pronounced that incorrectly, I apologize. So those are he's got two rookie linebackers and then Fred Warner, who I would go out on a limb and I'd say that Fred Warner is the most underrated player in the entire NFL right now. He sort of has that Harrison Smith vibe to him, in the sense where he's just a guy that makes a lot of plays and no one really notices. I don't know why no one notices, but he's an extremely efficient tackler. I've said this about a lot of linebackers this year, but I'll say the same thing about him. He travels sideline to sideline extremely well. He's got great instincts to the football, great nose for the ball once he gets there as well. And he's just very quietly one of the best linebackers in the game. He kind of has like he's sort of having a similar season to the one that Darius Leonard had last year, where you didn't really notice how good he was until you looked back at all the cumulative performance that he had all year and been like, wow, okay, this guy's for real. And then you don't really appreciate him unless you're a fan of San Francisco, or if you're a big football guy who loves to watch film of every single player in the NFL. Then you may have come across Fred Warner, but he does not get the attention that he deserves. He's been one of the best in the NFL this season, and he kind of completes this entire defense, right? So you've got the pass rush that's as dominant as any unit in the league. You got the secondary, which is Richard Sherman just put together one of his best seasons in his entire career in terms of allowing receptions and just being dominant in coverage. And you've got a couple guys in the secondary who are, nice pieces. And Witherspoon, I think you're a little bit higher on Williams than I am. And then you've got Ward, who has been up and down through his career, a little bit shaky here and there, but is having a good season as well. And then everything is tied together by this linebacker group, which is headed by Fred Warner. And as a whole, this defense just complements each other extremely well. This is just straight up, as a complete team, from guy number 1 to guy number 53 on this roster, there's just so much talent that is being maximized by extremely, extremely good coaching. San Francisco has basically two head coaches on their staff right now, because Robert Saleh, while he may not get a head coaching job this time around because of the way things have shaped up in the last week here, he has been one of the best coaches in the NFL this year. You can make an argument that it started last year, honestly. And Shanahan, of course, I can't sing his praises enough. Purely one of the best in the league. So it's a scary situation for the Vikings, because you go to Levi Stadium and you're not afraid of the home field advantage there like you are against the Superdome. You see the quarterback and you're not afraid of them like you are of Drew Brees. You see the playmakers on this team. You don't see a Michael Thomas that's breaking reception records. You look at this defense, you say, okay, Richard Sherman's old, or you say some of these defensive linemen are inexperienced, or whatever. You can try to find these holes, but there really isn't any true hole on this entire team. It's just, and anything that is a hole, excuse me, has been covered up so well this entire season by coaching that you may not have even noticed it.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that, and it's funny, as I was kind of listening to you discuss the linebackers a little bit, and to me that's that's an outstanding group for one, but it's that's probably the weakest level of that defense, because the defensive line is probably that's going to grab the attention. That's, I think, for my money, they're going to this matchup. That's the biggest problem
for sure.
If you're a Vikings
definitely
fan,
the biggest problem.
That defensive line versus the Vikings offensive line. You probably can't put your money on the Vikings offensive line performing like that against the Saints 2 weeks in a row. And even if they do, this is just a completely different level than what the Saints bring to the table. So it's going to be a problem. It's going to be about how much of a problem it is. It's definitely going to be an issue where they might, that group between Bosa, Ford, Buckner, whoever it is going to get in there, probably knock up football loose. Cousins probably gonna get sacked, 3 to 5 times. There's going to be issues there. Pressure's going to be on him all day, and he's going to have to handle it one way or another. But that's the big, if I'm looking at kind of overall, we've discussed all the levels of defense, all the key players, and I guess for me the one takeaway is protecting Kirk Cousins is going to be even more of a premium, right, to win this game than maybe other games, just because of how dominant that line is. Because I think the Vikings, they're going to be able to run the ball. I like the way that this unit and the zone blocking thing, and I think they can move pretty well and get that, especially the outside zone stuff. I like that, but it's going to be the passing game and keeping Kirk upright that will, I think, kind of hinder whether this team can put up the 20-something points to maybe win this game, or if it's going to be a 10 to 17 points, something like that in this game. I think it's going to hinge on the offensive line versus the Niners pass rush.
Absolutely. Can the Vikings offensive line hold up, and can this offense find a way to sustain drives against this defense?
Mm-hmm.
I think time of possession will be important in this game. Who was able to control the football more?
Yep.
Who's more careful with the football?
Third downs.
The little intricacies of this game.
Third downs more or less won the game against the Saints.
Absolutely.
I think the Vikings were 11 for 18 or something like that, 10 or 11 for 18, and the Saints were 4 for 11. That right there tells you the story.
Absolutely. So, as a whole on defense, there's so many playmakers on this unit. I mean, typically I like to run down on one or two names to really keep an eye on, but there's so many. Honestly, there's so many more on this team. I mean, 25, Richard Sherman is going to get his, and you can keep an eye on Nick Bosa, but he honestly may not even be the most devastating player on this defensive line. You can obviously he's the strongest candidate, but you look at the way that Buckner has played at times this year, the way that Ford has played when he's healthy, and the way that Armstead has played as well too. And really, there's just as a complete group, you're not going to find. This isn't possible in 2 or 3 years. These guys are all going to get paid big money, and it's crazy to see them all in prime form right now, playing at the way they are. And the Vikings are going to have to find a way to waste that talent. That's really the biggest answer here. And I think you said it perfectly. That matchup in the trenches is going to decide this game.
Yeah. Now, I will say, down the stretch, the Niners defense looked vulnerable. If you look at their schedule, who they played, now they played some high octane offenses, but basically since the Green Bay game, which they dominated the Packers and won 37-8, which probably has Packers fans frightened about a potential NFC Championship matchup with San Francisco. But they held Lamar Jackson in check, and the Ravens offense to that 20 points, and they actually won on a game-winning field goal. The next week they gave up 46 to the Saints. Then they lost to Atlanta at home, giving up 29. And then they won against the Rams 34-31 in a shootout. And then the final game of the year was that narrow win over the Seahawks, where they literally won by about 3 inches with that tight end Hollister being just short of the goal line. So teams have sort of kind of figured out, and a lot of it has been through the air, just looking at all these games here. Russell Wilson found some success in the second half. Jared Goff had a really nice game week 16 against his defense. Matt Ryan, very efficient in that Falcons win. A lot of it was to Julio Jones, for what it's worth. And then obviously the big game the Saints had in that shootout that was nearly 100 total points. Drew Brees got basically whatever he wanted in that game. So it seems like teams have sort of figured something out. But again, those quarterbacks in general are all, you could make the argument all of them are better than Kirk Cousins and probably better than this Minnesota passing offense. So they're vulnerable. There's a chance to score some points. It's how much you trust A, this offensive line, and B, Kirk Cousins to stand in there amidst probably a ton of pressure all day long and hit the throws.
The good news here, I suppose, is that in terms of going on the road, I mentioned this briefly before, this is probably the best road matchup still remaining in the playoffs. If you look at the teams that are still out there, you don't want to go to Lambeau Field. You don't want to go to CenturyLink Field, especially in the NFC specifically.
You're talking like environments to play in.
Yeah,
like tough,
right.
Yeah.
This is by no means the toughest one that you're going to find, and I do expect there to be a good amount of Vikings fans out there as well. At least they were well represented the last 2 times that these two teams played in San Francisco. So I guess that's one of the positives that you can look at here. But as a whole, this is going to be a very difficult matchup, and it'll be very fun for people out there who appreciate well coached football. Nobody's getting away with anything in this game. These two coaches going against each other. You've got old school defensive minded who has been creative in providing defensive, revolutionary changes to defenses for his entire career against one of the best up and comers, and has already firmly established himself as one of the best offensive minds. It's going to be a hell of a matchup. It's hard to be confident as a Vikings fan when you just look at the simple numbers here. 1 seed against a 6, 13-3 against 10-6. X amount. I don't even know how many Pro Bowlers they had off the top of my head, but there's a lot against what the Vikings having 3 and probably getting a few snubs there. Eric Kendricks being the obvious one, but
yeah.
My point being here is this matchup doesn't necessarily look pretty on paper, but there are some things to like, and there are some things that you can try to exploit, and there are some things that you can feel good about, especially coming off of that performance against the Saints. So with all that being said, how do you think this one shakes out?
I think to me, I'm approaching it very similar to the way I felt about the Saints game a week ago. I kind of felt confident in this Vikings defense. Mike Zimmer has a way now, it seems like, in some of these bigger games that, the defense seems to play pretty well for the most part. He's in the past, obviously, the thing that gave me confidence last week was that, against Sean Payton and against Drew Brees, he's been pretty good. And now, this is a very, very small sample size. But the Niners offense all season has been efficient, and last season, while Jimmy G was healthy, was efficient, except for that Vikings game, week 1. So, again, that's just one game I'm going off of, but Zimmer had Kyle Shanahan and Garoppolo held in check there. So I do think that Vikings defense can keep the Vikings as a team in this game for most of it. But overall, I'm going to end up selecting the Niners to win this game just because I trust the Niners defense and the defensive line to really put the heat on the Vikings offense and the offensive line in particular in pass protection. And I'm just not sure that group can hold up, and I'm not sure Cousins can hold up under that much pressure all day long. So that's what's going to make the decision for me. I think the Niners win by 4. Yeah, I'll give them a 4-point win. Just because, again, that there's so much heat to be brought by that pass rush, and I don't know if the Vikings pass protection can hold up that well 2 weeks in a row. Absolutely.
I completely agree with you that this matchup between the Vikings front 5 against the 4+ that San Francisco is going to be bringing is an absolute nightmare on paper. It does not look good for the Vikings, straight up. And ultimately, to me, that's the thing that will decide this game. I'm going to go with San Francisco as well. I'm not drinking I'm hyped coming off of that Saints game. I saw a lot of things from this Vikings team. I mentioned, we talked about this a lot on the last show. I feel very good about this Vikings team heading into this game. I just don't like the matchups. I don't like the situation. It all inspires zero confidence to me. If you think about a situation where what's the worst surroundings for Kirk Cousins? What type of defense is going to create the most likely, example of Kurt showing up?
It's probably one with a bunch of pass rushers that can get after him, cause problems in the pocket,
and a smart secondary that can.
And if he is able to get the pass off, you got a superstar secondary led by the smartest guy in the league that will know exactly it. I get what you're saying.
Okay, so you say you look at just that right there, and it's very, very hard to pick Minnesota in this game. There are, we've mentioned throughout the show, there are pieces of this game that I like, and there are individual matchups that I don't hate. And I think that if Kirk Cousins truly shows up again like he did against New Orleans and plays some of his best football of his career, which is what he did last week in crunch time against New Orleans, the Vikings are going to be in this game. I just don't see that happening. I see this as a recipe for disaster. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to kill your optimism in this game, and I hope I don't. But that's just how I feel. I look at the intricacies of this team, and it's just a recipe for disaster. It's everything that you don't want Kirk Cousins to have to run into, and it's everything that this offensive line has failed against in the past. Whether that's a big guy bull rushing through your interior. Good luck, Pat Elflein, this week. Good luck, Garrett Bradbury. I'm deathly afraid of what DeForest Buckner is going to do to those guys. And then if they're not the ones that are getting it, Nick Bosa against Riley Reif, that's not a matchup that I enjoy, folks. And so if the Vikings aren't running the ball effectively, which I do think they have a good chance to do, Cook is cooking, no pun intended. So there is that element to this. If they can get a steady running game going, get Madison involved as well to keep Cook fresh, then the Vikings will have a chance. But they have to sustain drives. And I just don't see that happening because I see a lot of holding penalties in the Vikings' future. And I see a lot of sacks and drive-killing moments. And ultimately, to me, I've got San Francisco winning by probably 2 scores. I'll say by 10 points. And I think that might be putting it kindly, to be honest with you. But I'm just I'm not confident when you break down kind of the worst-case scenario for this Vikings team, their kryptonite, if you will. It, to me, is the way that San Francisco is the way that their roster is composed.
So I just want to ask you one more thing before we pick the other games. How much do you believe in it's an intangible, emotional thing with this team being the underdog? because it seems like this is the other thing that we talked about with kind of the Clement in the pocket guys all day today was, for as bad as sometimes the Vikings play when they're expected to win, when they're favored in games, or they go up against teams like the Bills last year, Broncos this year, and they kind of come out really flat. It seems like a lot of times, like the Saints game, right, that they come out with when nobody expects them to win, and Zimmer just kind of has that attitude about him where he thrives off of that, and for whatever reason, it seems like the guys have kind of bought into that in terms of this postseason. Right. So many of the players over and over last week, nobody thinks we can do this, nobody thinks we can win, and then in the post-game interviews, nobody gave us a chance, nobody believed in us, all this and that.
Right.
And it's not just one guy saying it, it's all the players saying it. Mike Zimmer is saying it. Is there anything about you that thinks that might play into the result of this game? Do you believe in that type of thing, or you kind of just because I for whatever reason, it's giving me a little bit more confidence that they're the underdog, and I think they're gonna come out with a chip on their shoulder and fight and keep this game close. Whereas in another scenario where maybe they are only maybe they're favored by 3, or maybe it's a pick 'em, whatever, I wouldn't be as confident.
Well, to me, that is the Vikings' only edge in this game.
Yeah,
honestly, it's their source of power this week. It's what makes them. Honestly, I don't care what it takes to get this Vikings team up. If that's what does it, if that's what gets these guys playing, to their highest level. And for me personally, I think I'm hopefully speaking for a lot of you guys as well. But when someone else doubts that I can do something, it just makes me want to do it that much more. So to me, that's an engine for success for this Vikings team. If they're buying into that, yeah, that's the edge that's the edge that can make a difference in this game. And the only problem with that is, can San Francisco, can they match that energy? Are they able to come hyped? There's a lot of experience on this defense. It starts with Richard Sherman. There's also a lot of inexperience too. So there might be some guys who have been reading the newspaper, that headline that you've mentioned multiple times this week about how San Francisco basically has a cakewalk to the Super Bowl. Are they drinking their own Kool-Aid? There are veterans like Sherman, but there are some guys that might be feeling themselves a little bit.
One thing to mention too, you talked about inexperience. Jimmy G, this is his first playoff game, right? And now, if historically quarterbacks starting their first playoff game as at home as number 1 seed, not great. I think I saw it on ESPN today. Now, these are just kind of hand-picked stats and stuff, so you can feel about this how you want to. But out of 9 games in this scenario where the quarterback is making his first career start for the number 1 seed in that home divisional game, 4-5 record. And so that's where Jimmy G falls in here. And again, this is more of a, it's not really causation. It's kind of just a correlation.
Right.
But it does speak to, there's a lot of pressure now and expectation on Jimmy G, because the Niners are clearly the best team remaining, I think, in the NFC after the Saints went down, right? They are clearly the best team left, and they should be expected to come out of the NFC at this point. And they just have to beat the 6th seed, and then, the next week, if the Packers win at home, they play the Packers, and who they already beat at home this year by 30. It's with that whole cakewalk to the Super Bowl thing, there is some merit to that take.
Maybe they're looking past the Vikings. That's honestly, as a Vikings fan, you have to hope for that.
Yeah.
You have to hope that they're looking beyond the Vikings.
That's how the media is approaching it in San Francisco. We don't know how the players are or the coaches or anything, but this is a new environment for Jimmy G specifically to be starting a playoff game as number 1 seed at home. So hopefully, from our perspective, hopefully that's rattling him a little bit, and the Vikings can get at him early and affect him a little bit.
Hopefully it is the intangibles that make the difference here. The Vikings are very fundamentally sound. They're very well coached. They've been in this situation before, and it seems like they know what they're doing in terms of preparing for this and not allowing whatever the hell happened in Philadelphia to happen again. I'm confident that Zimmer doesn't make the same mistake twice in that regard. So, ultimately, I still am siding with the 49ers, but to me, what you mentioned before about those that intangible underdog quality that seems to inspire this team and really kind of amps up this fan base as a whole. That's their power, and that's the one chance that they have to go into San Francisco to get this game, is if they can kind of want it more. And I know you guys are sick. Everyone's sick of hearing, those coaching cliches, but if the Vikings need to want this one more, they need to act like it, they need to play like it, and they need to play fundamentally sound football throughout. And that's really the only chance that they're gonna. There's no shot the Vikings blow out the San Francisco. That's not happening. If they can play this one close, play smart, win the turnover battle, win time of possession, do those little things right, then they might have a chance. But ultimately, we're both siding with San Francisco. So,
yep.
All right, let's move into these last couple games here, and we'll wrap up the show. Your guys, Tennessee. They head to Baltimore this week, playing against probably the most dominant team remaining in the postseason, and one of the most lethal offensive attacks that we've seen to date, headed by Lamar Jackson. I believe Mark Ingram is returning as well. They've got all the playmakers in the world. Mark Roman has put together one of the revolutionary offense. They're very well coached. And they'll go against Tennessee, who is led by Derrick Henry, who has turned himself into a top 3 running back in the NFL over the last couple months. He's an absolute freight train out there. He's basically has been impossible to tackle on the first. He breaks the first tackle every single time, simply put. Mm-hmm. And the question here is, can Tannehill show up, because he played okay last week. Wasn't asked to do a whole lot.
Tannehill put together a Christian Ponder performance last week, and they still beat the Patriots at Foxborough.
Can they do that in Baltimore?
I really, really, really want to pick the Titans, and I think you know what? Screw it, I'm going to give me the Titans. And that's more me picking with my heart. I'm a big I've become a Mike Vrabel guy over the past couple of years, and Tannehill, again, if he can show up and play a decent game, that takes their offense. Like, for example, last week, if he puts together an average game compared to what he's the last 8 games of the regular season, they blow out the Patriots in that game. And so I think this offense can compete with the Ravens. They are nearly as efficient, and then you put it in the way that Derrick Henry's running the ball lately. This one, depending on the weather, I think it's supposed to be rainy a little bit, which always can muddle things a little bit.
Sure.
But it hypothetically, if it were to turn into a shootout or something, I do think the Titans have the capability to keep up with the Ravens. But the fact that it is going to be rainy and the weather will be sketchy, I do think also kind of just inherently brings in the underdog a little bit more than usual. So I'll take the Titans. Why not?
Okay. Well, I'm going to take Baltimore. I'm going to take the clear favorite in the AFC and be safe with this pick.
They're definitely the best team in the NFL remaining right now, and it's not really close. But
it's going to take a historic upset, and I mean, the NFL playoffs is filled with historic upsets, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just that Baltimore has put together such a great season, and they've had a couple weeks now to prepare for this matchup. Lamar Jackson got his postseason taste last year. It did not end the way that he wanted to. He's a completely different player now, for what it's worth. But to me, this is a legendary season in the making for Baltimore, and tripping over Tennessee would just it has the same vibe as the Patriots losing their 19-0 season to the Giants, because this has been such a crazy run of success for Baltimore with all their all the new quirks that they're putting on a modern offense. Destiny has to favor Baltimore. So I'm going to side with Destiny here. I'm going to pick Baltimore too. Okay. And that's where we're going with that one. So the remaining 2 games here, Houston, Deshaun Watson takes on Patrick Mahomes. That's a fun matchup for Bears fans, I'm sure, in the divisional round. And Kansas City playing at home, one of the toughest environments there is. Houston coming off of kind of a win that Buffalo sort of lost to them in the end, where they just couldn't play offense anymore, and Deshaun Watson sort of took over and became Superman. Against Kansas City, Andy Reid, historically not great in the postseason. You got to feel for the guy at some point. But he's got arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. I still think that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL. And plenty of playmakers, a rushing attack that has been viable, not good, but viable, and a defense that has been a lot better this year with Tyrann Mathieu than it was in the past. Can Houston pull off this upset?
I don't think so. Now, this is coming from the guy who picked the Titans to beat the Ravens, so make of that what you will, but I'm going to go with the Chiefs. And it's like, they just like that kind of win at home over Buffalo and over, with Josh Allen playing as erratically as he did doesn't impress me a ton. And especially if Will Fuller is still out, this offense is drastically different without him, especially on third down. So I'll go with Kansas City. That seems like the safe pick. And for one of these games, I guess I better go with the safe pick.
Yeah, I'm going Kansas City as well. They're definitely the safe pick here. They're the definitive favorite in this situation. There's just as much as I enjoy Houston, I just don't think they've got enough this year. It's really Deshaun Watson's show, and if Laramie Tunsil isn't able to, provide protection, which let's just be honest here. I know he's a Pro Bowler, but he has been up and down this year. He gets a lot of stupid penalties. That offensive line behind Tunsil is just not very good, and Kansas City's pass rushing has gotten better with Spagnuolo over the course of this year, and ultimately Watson's going to have to probably try to win a shootout against Mahomes, and I'm going to take Mahomes against any quarterback in a shootout situation. So good luck to Houston. I will be rooting for Houston in this situation, but ultimately I think Kansas City's got the W here. And then the last game of the week, another fun one for Vikings fans. Seattle heads to Lambeau Field to take on the Packers. And so Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson will duke it out once again. Matchup of two quarterbacks with, Super Bowl history. You've also got a rookie head coach in Matt LaFleur that's going to get his first taste of the postseason against Pete Carroll, who has seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in the postseason. Seattle, unfortunately, has been ravaged by injury, so that they're not going to be at full strength, whereas Green Bay is about as healthy as they're going to get. Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams is finally fully healthy. They're going to bring the house at him as well, and they're playing at home. Can Seattle get this upset against our favorite team, the Green Bay Packers?
These are the two weakest teams remaining in the playoffs, NFC and AFC combined. That's how I feel about this game.
Okay.
I'm going with Green Bay because they're at home. And apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently Russell Wilson has been like really bad at Lambeau in the past. So maybe it's a cold weather thing. Like obviously in Seattle, it's not like, scorching hot all the time, but maybe that's, I don't know, because he was really bad too in that playoff game in Minneapolis when it was like 5 below zero. But I'm going with Green Bay just because they're at home. And if this was in Seattle, I'm picking Seattle. So that's really the only advantage here to me.
So I'm going to pick Seattle, and the only reason I'm picking Seattle is because I picked the favorite in all three other games, San Francisco, Baltimore, and Kansas City. And every weekend in the NFL postseason is typically filled with some sort of upset. And I see this game having the most upset potential because of Russell Wilson. And Marshawn Lynch apparently is going to get more touches this week. We'll see how that pans out. He's looked very okay since coming out of retirement to play running back, I guess. But basically it's been Travis Homer. No one really talks about him.
And then Lynch gets it at the goal line and gets the touchdowns.
Yeah, and everyone sees that and they think that he's still a beast, but I don't know. I'm skeptical. But my point being, ultimately, I think Seattle's going to get the win here. Russell Wilson with the game on the line is as dangerous as they come. I think that's the guy. If I had to pick one quarterback to go 80 yards in 90 seconds, it's Russell Wilson for me. And I think that he can do that against Green Bay. So ultimately, I think that Seattle is going to get this one done, and they're going to upset the Packers, which will be enjoyable for this fan base. So those are your matchups for this week. Any final thoughts before we wrap up the show here?
I reserve the right to change my pick if the Vikings wear all purple again this week.
Okay. I will make a note of that, and we'll move forward as such. So thanks as always for listening to the show. You can find us on iTunes. Subscribe there if you haven't already. Check us out on Daily Norseman. Leave a comment in the comment section below if you like. We like to read those, and we always enjoy your thoughts. And you can find us on Twitter at unbelievable_MN. And make sure to check out the rest of the Climbing the Pocket Network and the shows that everyone else on this team is providing. They're excellent as well. And I think that's all I got for you guys. So thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll talk to you next. We'll we'll be continuing to talk about the postseason following a Vikings victory. Otherwise, we'll begin the off season and start to figure out new topics to talk about on this show. So, thanks as always, and we'll catch you guys next week.